I stood in the freezing cold, staring at my bank balance and realizing I had to choose between gas or groceries. I could not afford both. While my phone buzzed with texts demanding I help my brother yet again. An old man with steel blue eyes slid a folded receipt across the counter. He told me it was time for the person who never asked for a single dime to finally decide who was allowed to keep spending them. My name is Avery Ruiz, and 6 months ago, I was leading a team of 12 researchers at Aurelia Biotech, studying the regenerative properties of cellular structures. Tonight, I was standing behind a scratched plexiglass counter at a fuel and fresh station in the outskirts of Westbridge, wiping questionable sticky residue off the conveyor belt, while the hum of the slushy machine drilled a hole directly into my migraine. I am 30 years old. I have a Master of Science degree that is currently gathering dust in a storage box, and as of 5 minutes ago, I had exactly $42.18 to my name. The automatic doors slid open with a wheezing mechanical grind, letting in a gust of wind that felt like it had traveled straight from the Arctic Circle just to slap me in the face. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in December. The store was empty, save for the buzzing of the fluorescent lights and the low hum of the refrigeration units. I pulled my phone out of my back pocket, the screen glowing with the harsh reality of my banking app. I stared at that number, $42. I did the math in my head, a calculation that had become a terrifying daily ritual. My gas tank was sitting just below the empty line. The warning light had been staring at me for the last 15 miles, a judgmental orange eye. To fill the tank of my beat-up sedan would cost me about $35. That would get me home to the Harbor Line lofts and back here for my next shift, plus the commute to my second job at the grocery store tomorrow afternoon. But if I spent $35 on gas, I would be left with $7. $7 meant I was eating instant noodles for the 5th day in a row. If I bought groceries' actual vegetables, maybe a piece of chicken, something that did not come with a sodium warning label, I would not have enough gas to get to work tomorrow. It was a choice between mobility and nutrition, between keeping the job that paid the rent and keeping the body that did the work alive. My phone vibrated in my hand, a long, aggressive buzz that made my stomach clench. I did not have to look to know who it was. It was the Ruiz family chat. It was always them. I looked anyway. The message was from my mother, Diane. It started with 3 heart emojis, followed by a string of texts that made my jaw ache from how hard I was grinding my teeth. Avery, sweetie, I know it is late, but Mason is in a bind. The supplier for the bar is demanding cash up front tomorrow, or they are cutting him off before the holiday rush. It is just a small list of invoices. We are all pitching in. He has the kids to think about. I closed my eyes. The phrase burned behind my eyelids. He has the kids to think about. That was the mantra of the Ruiz family. Because Mason was 33 and had 2 toddlers, his financial irresponsibility was treated like a natural disaster, something unavoidable that required federal aid. Because I was single, childless, and historically employed in a high-paying field, I was the federal aid. They did not know I had quit Aurelia Biotech. They did not know I had burned out so hard I had started hallucinating cell cultures on my bedroom ceiling. They just knew I had moved into the Harbor Line lofts, a place I could barely afford now, and assumed my silence meant I was hoarding wealth. Another text came through. This one was a direct image from Mason. It was a photo of his 2 kids, my niece and nephew, sleeping in their beds. The caption read, "Do it for them. I promise I'm good for it next month." He was never good for it. He was never going to be good for it. Mason's yard, his craft beer bar, was a sinking ship that he kept patching with my credit card limits. I was currently paying off $4,000 of debt that technically belonged to the bar's new sound system, a purchase he had made 2 months ago while I was struggling to pay my own electric bill. I shoved the phone back into my pocket. I could not deal with them right now. I had to decide between gas and food. I looked at the roller grill, where 3 shriveled hot dogs were turning slowly, looking like ancient artifacts. I felt a wave of nausea. Gas it is, I decided. I would drink water and sleep to forget the hunger. The door wheezed open again. A young woman walked in. She looked about my age, maybe younger, but the exhaustion etched into her face added 10 years to her features. She was carrying a toddler on her hip, a little girl wrapped in a pink coat that looked a size too small. The woman hurried to the back, grabbed a gallon of milk and a loaf of white bread, and rushed to the counter. She did not look at me. She looked at the card reader as if it were a bomb she was trying to defuse. "Just these, please," she whispered. I scanned them. "That will be $8.50. She slid a debit card into the machine. We both waited. The silence in the store was heavy, broken only by the toddler coughing against her shoulder. The machine beeped, a harsh, rejecting tone, declined. The woman's shoulders slumped. It was a posture I knew well. It was the posture of someone who had done everything right and still lost. She pulled the card out and rubbed the chip on her jeans, as if cleaning it would conjure money into the account. "Try it again," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, I know there is $10 in there." She tried again, declined. She looked at me, her eyes welling up. "I just need the milk. Put the bread back." I looked at the milk. Then I looked at my phone sitting on the counter. Next to the register, $42.18. If I paid for her, I would have $33. Not enough for a full tank, not enough for groceries. I would be risking running out of gas on the highway. I would be risking everything for a stranger. But I looked at the little girl, and then I heard my mother's voice in my head. "Mason has kids. Mason used his kids as a shield to extort money for sound systems and craft beer. This woman was just trying to feed hers, without saying a word." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my own debit card. I tapped it against the screen before my brain could stop my hand. Approved. "It is taken care of," I said, tearing off the receipt. The woman stared at me. "What? No. I cannot ask you to do that." "You did not ask," I said, sliding the milk and bread toward her. "Go. It is cold outside." She looked like she might cry, or hug me, but I turned away and started wiping the counter again, signaling that the interaction was over. I could not handle gratitude right now. I could barely handle my own reality. She whispered a thank you that sounded like a prayer and hurried out into the night. I stood there, staring at the empty store. I had just sabotaged myself. Again, it was a reflex, a sickness. I was programmed to set myself on fire to keep other people warm. I was still mentally berating myself when the door opened for a third time. The wind howled, but the man who stepped inside did not seem to feel it. He was old, not frail old, but ancient and enduring, like a mountain or a very expensive piece of antique furniture. He was wearing a heavy wool coat in a dark charcoal gray, and a matching fedora pulled low over his eyes. In the harsh, flickering LED lights of the Fuel and Fresh, he looked entirely out of place. He looked like a black and white photograph that had been cut out and pasted into a neon-colored cartoon. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, walking past the energy drinks and the chips, straight to the back aisle where we kept the emergency staples. I watched him. He did not browse. He loaded his basket with a strange precision. 10 bags of rice, 10 bags of dried beans, canned tuna, powdered milk, boxes of pasta. He filled one basket, set it on the floor, and started filling a second one. It was not a late-night snack run. It was a supply run. It looked like he was shopping for a shelter or stocking a bunker. He brought the haul to the counter in 3 trips. He did not say a word, just placed the items down with care. His hands were thin, the skin like parchment paper, but his grip was steady. He had a silver ring on his pinky finger that caught the light. I started scanning. The beep of the scanner was the only sound in the room. Rice, beans, tuna, more rice. The total climbed. $100, $200, $500. He watched the numbers rise on the screen with zero reaction. He did not flinch. He did not check a wallet. He just stood there, watching my hands move. "That is a lot of rice," I said, trying to break the tension. He looked up. His eyes were shocking. They were a pale, icy blue, sharp as cut steel. They were not the eyes of a confused old man. They were the eyes of a hawk spotting a field mouse. "Winter is coming," he said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and sounded like it belonged in a boardroom, not a gas station. Hunger does not wait for convenient times. I finished scanning the last can. "Your total is $3,412.50. I winced as I said it. It was an absurd amount of money. I waited for him to realize his mistake, to claim he forgot his card, to cause a scene. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He opened it and began counting out $100 bills. The money looked old, soft, worn bills that had been in circulation for a long time. Not the crisp new ones you get from a bank. He counted out 35 bills and placed the stack on the counter. "Keep the change," he said, "for the employee fund, if such a thing exists." I stared at the money. The change was nearly $90. That was my gas. That was my groceries. "I cannot keep that," I said automatically. "Company policy." "Then buy yourself a coat that actually works," he said, his eyes flicking to my thin company fleece, "or pay for the next girl who needs milk." My heart stopped. He had seen. He had been outside, or watching from the shadows. I processed the transaction, my hands shaking slightly. I printed his receipt, the machine chugging out a long strip of paper detailing the thousands of dollars of dry goods. "Here is your receipt, sir," I said, handing it to him. "And here is yours," he replied. He reached into his inner pocket again and pulled out a single piece of paper. He slid it across the scratched counter, right over the spot where I had wiped away the sticky, slushy residue. It was not a thermal receipt. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock, folded once down the middle. It looked like the bill you would get at a five-star restaurant, or an invitation to a wedding you were not rich enough to attend. I looked at it, then up at him. "I did not buy anything." "You buy things every day," he said. "You pay with your time. You pay with your energy. You pay with your future. Today, you paid with your last few dollars." He leaned in closer. The smell of expensive tobacco and old rain clung to him. "You are Avery Ruiz, are you not?" The sound of my last name in his mouth made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't a question. It was a verification. "Yes," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "How do you know my name?" His eyes narrowed, just for a fraction of a second, as if he was looking for a specific trait in my face. He seemed to find whatever he was looking for. His expression did not soften, but it shifted. It went from observation to decision. "Because I make it my business to know where the value lies in a collapsing market," he said cryptically. He tapped the heavy cream paper with one long finger. "You just chose someone else over yourself. Avery Ruiz. Again, you stood there, calculated your own survival, and then gave it away because you have been trained to believe your needs are secondary." I felt a lump form in my throat. He was describing my entire life. He was describing the text messages from Diane. He was describing the way I let Mason build his dreams on the foundation of my credit score. "Who are you?" I asked. He tipped his fedora, a small, old-fashioned gesture that felt terrifyingly final. "I am the man who is offering you a different way to do the math," he said. "Take the paper, if you want. That receipt can be the last time you ever have to make a choice like the one you made tonight." The wind battered the glass doors again, rattling the frame. The cold was seeping in, freezing my fingers. But the heat coming off the man's gaze was enough to burn. "Open it when you are alone," he commanded. And then, without waiting for an answer, he turned and walked out into the darkness, leaving his $3,000 worth of groceries sitting on the floor. "Wait," I called out. "Your groceries." He did not look back. The automatic doors wheezed shut, cutting off his silhouette. I was alone again. Just me, the buzzing lights, a stack of cash in the register, and a folded piece of cream-colored paper that felt heavy enough to anchor a ship. I looked down at the paper. On the outside, in elegant, raised black ink, was a single symbol, an old-fashioned scale, balanced perfectly. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another text from the family chat. "Avery, Are you ignoring us? Mason is really stressing out here. I looked at the phone, then I looked at the receipt. You just chose someone else over yourself, the old man had said. I picked up the heavy paper. My hands were trembling. I had a feeling that whatever was written inside was going to cost a lot more than $42.18. It was going to cost me everything I thought I knew about my family. To understand why I was standing in a freezing gas station staring at a receipt that cost more than my car. You have to understand the life I had before the fuel and fresh. You have to understand Aurelia Biotech. Less than a year ago, I was not wearing a polyester vest that smelled like old fryer grease. I was wearing a white lab coat with my name embroidered on the pocket. I was the lead researcher on a project dedicated to cellular regeneration in damaged nervous tissue. I was making $120,000 a year, plus bonuses. I was important. I was respected. And I was working 16 hours a day, fueled by caffeine and the desperate need to prove that I was good enough. I loved that job. I loved the sterile smell of the lab, the hum of the centrifuges, and the quiet logic of science. In the lab, if you put X and Y together under the right conditions, you got Z. It was predictable. It was fair. My family was not fair. The Ruiz family dynamic was a carefully constructed machine designed to extract resources from the most capable member and redistribute them to the most chaotic one. My father, Robert, or Rob as he preferred, was a man who had turned conflict avoidance into an Olympic sport. He was a ghost in his own house, sitting in his recliner, watching baseball, and pretending that if he did not hear the problem, it did not exist. My mother, Diane, was the engine of the machine. She did not wield power with commands. She wielded it with tears, with sighs, and with a weaponized fragility that could crush you faster than a sledgehammer. And then there was Mason. My brother Mason was 33 years old, 3 years my senior, and he was perpetually on the verge of greatness. He was a visionary, according to our mother. According to everyone else, he was a man who started things he could not finish. His latest venture was Mason's Yard, a craft beer bar located in a part of town that was up and coming, which was code for expensive rent and no foot traffic. The bar was failing. Mason was failing. But in the Ruiz household, Mason's failures were treated like natural disasters, unfortunate events that required the entire village to rebuild. And I was the village. The refrain was always the same, spoken with a hush of reverence. Because Mason has kids, those 4 words were the master key that unlocked my bank account, my schedule, and my sanity. Mason had 2 toddlers, a boy and a girl. They were sweet, innocent, and completely weaponized by their father. Because Mason had kids, he could not fail. Because Mason had kids, he needed the big house he could not afford. Because Mason had kids, I had to pick up the slack. I was single. I was childless. I had a high-paying job. In the eyes of my family, this meant I had no real responsibilities. My time was seen as a public resource, free for the taking. My Saturdays were the worst. For 2 years, my Saturday routine was etched in stone. I would wake up at 6 in the morning after a 60-hour work week, drive to the Copper and Vine Market, the expensive one where the tomatoes cost $3 a pound, and the cheese had names I could not pronounce, and I would buy groceries. Not for me, for them. I would drive to Mason's house, my trunk loaded with $400 worth of organic meat and vegetables. I would walk in, and the scene was always the same. Mason would be sitting at the kitchen island, staring at his MacBook, frowning at spreadsheets that never balanced. His wife, Kelsey, would be taking a mental health morning in the bath. My parents would be on the sofa, Dad watching the game, Mom supervising the chaos. I would put away the groceries. I would cook lunch. I would wipe sticky hands and change diapers and break up fights over toys. I would fix the leaking faucet because Mason did not have the right tools. I would unclog the dishwasher because Kelsey did not know you had to rinse the plates first. And while I scrubbed grease off their pans, I would hear my mother's voice drifting from the living room. Mason is working so hard on that business plan, she would say, loud enough for me to hear. He is under so much pressure. It is so good. He has support. She never said thank you to me. She praised Mason for existing, and she praised the abstract concept of support, which was just a synonym for Avery. I remember the day I was promoted to team lead at Aurelia. It was a massive achievement. I was the youngest lead in the department's history. I had beaten out 3 senior researchers for the spot. I felt like I was flying. I drove straight to my parents' house, a bottle of champagne in the passenger seat, desperate to share the win. I walked in, grinning, and held up the bottle. "I got it," I said. "I got the promotion. I am running the regeneration team." The room went silent for exactly 3 seconds. My father looked up and gave a vague smile. "That is nice, honey. Good for you." My mother opened her mouth to speak, but Mason cut her off. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the salt and pepper shakers jump. "I cannot believe this supplier," he groaned, rubbing his temples theatrically. "They are jacking up the price on the IPA kegs by 15%. 15%. Do they want to bankrupt me? How am I supposed to feed my kids if the margins disappear?" The air left the room. The spotlight swung instantly, violently, from my career-defining moment to Mason's beer prices. "Oh, no," my mother gasped, rushing to his side. 15%. That is criminal. Mason, honey, what will you do?" "I do not know, Mom," he said, casting a side eye at me and the champagne bottle. "I guess we just have to tighten our belts. Unlike some people, I do not have a corporate safety net." My mother turned to me, her face a mask of tragic concern. "Avery, maybe we can celebrate your little news later. Mason is in crisis mode right now. Actually, since you got that raise, do you think you could cover the car insurance for the grandbaby's minivan this month? Just until the beer distributor calms down. We all have to pitch in." I stood there, clutching the cold bottle of champagne, my little news. "Sure," I said. My voice sounded hollow. "Sure, Mom." I left the bottle on the counter. They drank it that night. I know because Mason posted a picture of it on Instagram with the caption, "Celebrating the grind." Hustle never stops. The cracks in my armor started to show on my 29th birthday. I had been working late every night for a month, trying to meet a deadline for a grant proposal. I had told my family I could not host a dinner, so they said they would handle it. "We will do a remote celebration," my mother had chirped in the group chat. "We will eat cake in your honor." I sat in my apartment that night, surrounded by takeout containers of pad thai, wearing sweatpants, waiting for a video call that never came. At 8 o'clock, a photo popped up in the family chat. It was a photo of a sheet cake, a cheap one from the grocery store bakery, the kind with the waxy frosting. It said "Happy Birthday Avery" in sloppy blue icing, but the photo was not taken at my parents' house. It was taken at Mason's. In the background, I could see the blurry figures of my parents, Mason, Kelsey, and the kids. They were laughing. They were holding plates. They were eating my birthday cake. They had gathered to celebrate my birthday without inviting me. "We did not want to make you drive all the way out here when you are so busy." My text notification read, "We are eating a slice for you. Love you." I stared at the phone. I was 30 minutes away. I would have driven. I would have crawled. That night, I opened a notebook. I am a scientist. I deal in data. If my feelings were lying to me, the data would tell the truth. I started to write down every single time I said yes to them in the last 6 months. January 4th. Picked up Dad's heart medication because he did not feel up to driving. Round trip 2 hours, cost 0, but missed a team meeting, February 12th. Paid Mason's electric bill because it was a clerical error, and he was about to be shut off. Cost $450. March 20th, babysat the kids, so Mason and Kelsey could go to a networking dinner. Found out later via Facebook it was a concert. Time 8 hours. The list went on for pages, thousands of dollars, hundreds of hours, and in the column where I wrote down what I got in return. The page was blank. No, that is not true. I got anxiety. I got guilt. I got the privilege of being allowed to remain in the family circle, as long as I kept paying the admission fee. The breaking point came 3 months ago. I was drowning at work. The stress was causing tremors in my hands, a bad trait for someone handling microscopic samples. I requested 3 weeks of leave. I needed to go to the ocean. I needed to stare at the water and not speak to a soul. I booked a small rental house on the coast. I told my family I was going off the grid to recharge. 30 minutes after I sent the text, my mother called. She was crying. "Avery, thank God you are taking time off. It is a miracle. It is divine intervention." "Mom, I am going away," I said. "I need to sleep." I know, she sobbed. "But Mason, he has this once-in-a-lifetime chance. The National Bar Expo is in Las Vegas. If he goes, he can meet investors. He can save the business. But Kelsey has the flu. And we cannot watch the kids because your father's back is acting up. We were going to have to make him cancel. It would destroy him." She paused, waiting for the programming to kick in. "But you are off," she said, her voice brightening. "You have 3 whole weeks. You can stay at Mason's house and watch the Angels. It is perfect. You can relax there. They have a pool." "I booked a house, Mom," I said. "I paid a deposit." "Family comes first, Avery," she said, her voice dropping to that dangerous, disappointed register. "Mason is trying to build a future for those kids. Are you really going to let a deposit stand in the way of your brother's success? After all he does?" I still do not know why I did it. Maybe I was too tired to fight. Maybe the conditioning was too deep. I canceled the rental. I lost the deposit. I spent my 3 weeks of rest living in Mason's chaotic house, waking up at 5 in the morning to crying toddlers, cleaning up vomit, and driving the minivan to soccer practice. Mason went to Vegas. I saw the pictures. He was not meeting investors. He was drinking cocktails by a pool at the Bellagio. He was gambling. He bought a $2,000 watch and posted a photo of it with the hashtag #BossLife. When he came back, he did not ask how I was. He complained that the house was messy. I went back to Aurelia Biotech completely empty. I was a shell. 2 days later, I mixed up 2 vital reagents in the lab. It destroyed a month's worth of samples. It was a $20,000 mistake. I was called into the director's office. They were kind, which made it worse. They asked about my mental health. They suggested a sabbatical, but I knew I could not do it anymore. I could not carry the weight of the lab and the weight of the Ruiz family. I resigned. I walked away from the 6-figure salary, the prestige, and the future I had built. When I told my family I had quit, there was no sympathy. There was panic. "But what about the loan you promised to co-sign?" Mason asked. "Does this mean you cannot pay for the family Christmas trip?" My mother asked. And then, the shift happened. Since I no longer had a real job, my time became officially worthless in their eyes. "Since you are not doing anything," Diane would text at 10 in the morning. "Come drive Dad to the podiatrist." "Since you are free," Mason would say, "come manage the bar inventory tonight. I cannot pay you, but it will get you out of the house." They did not see a daughter in crisis. They saw a Roomba that had stopped working and needed to be kicked back into motion. I moved into the cheapest apartment I could find in a safe building, the Harborline Lofts. I took the job at Harvest Way Market during the day and Fuel and Fresh at night because I needed money that they did not know about. I needed to pay my rent, pay my debts, and try to rebuild a savings account that they had drained dry. But tonight, standing in the cold, staring at the gas pump, I realized the truth. The old man was right. I was not a daughter. I was not a sister. I was a logistical solution. I was an ATM that also did laundry. I was a support system for a group of people who would watch me drown if it meant they could keep their feet dry. I looked at the cream-colored receipt the stranger had given me. I thought about the $42 in my bank account. I thought about Mason's new watch. I got into my car. I did not buy the gas. I did not buy the groceries. I drove on fumes, praying the car would make it to my cold, empty apartment. I had a decision to make, and for the first time in my life, I was terrified that I might actually make the one that was good for me. As I drove away from the gas station, The heater in my car rattling against the silence. My mind drifted back to the envelopes. They had started arriving about 6 months before I moved out of my parents' house. They were distinct, made of heavy, cream-colored paper that felt more like fabric than wood pulp. In a pile of glossy junk mail, bills, and flyers for pizza discounts, they stood out like a diamond in a handful of gravel. I remember the first time I held one. The return address was embossed in black ink, Hale Legacy Trust. It was addressed to Ms. Avery Ruiz, not the Ruiz family, not occupant, just me. I had barely turned it over in my hands when my mother's hand snatched it away. "Garbage," Diane said, her voice light and breezy, but her fingers crumpled the corner of the envelope with unnecessary force. "It is just insurance spam. Honey, legal junk?" "It looks important," I said, watching her walk toward the kitchen trash can. "It has a wax seal stamp on the back." "That is how they get you," she laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "It is from your father's side of the family, the Hales. You know how they are." I did not know how they were, not really. All I knew was the mythology Diane had spun for 30 years. My father, Rob, had been the rebel who chose love over money, marrying my mother against the wishes of his wealthy, cold-hearted father. The Hales were painted as villains in a Dickens novel, rich, cruel, and obsessed with control. "They loved to send these threatening little notices," Diane continued, ripping the envelope in half. The sound of the heavy paper tearing was loud in the quiet kitchen. "Terms of service updates. Trust fund disclaimers intended to make sure we know we are getting nothing. It is just drama. Avery, best to ignore it. Your father gets so upset if he sees them. So I just filter them out. To protect him." She dropped the pieces into the bin and covered them with wet coffee grounds. "Money from them comes with dirty strings," she added, wiping her hands on a towel. "We are better off without it. We have love. They just have bank accounts." I believed her. Why would I not? I was trained to believe that the Ruiz family was a fortress of warmth and the outside world was full of cold transactions. I did not think about those envelopes again. I assumed they were just another part of the us against them narrative that kept us bonded. But the seed of doubt had been planted, even if I did not water it. After the humiliation of my 29th birthday, the remote party, the cheap cake, the realization that I was an option, not a priority. I made the decision to leave. It was not a dramatic exit. I did not storm out. I just quietly signed a lease on a one-bedroom apartment at Harborline Lofts. It was 40 minutes away from my parents' house. 40 minutes was a specific calculation. It was far enough that they could not just drop by for dinner, but close enough that I could not be accused of abandoning the family. The weekend I moved. I packed my life into cardboard boxes alone. I carried my books, my clothes, and my few pieces of furniture down the stairs and into a rented truck. My phone buzzed the entire time. "So proud of our independent girl," my mother texted. "We would come help, but Mason's back is acting up, and we need to help him with the kids while Kelsey rests. You are so strong." Av Mason texted, "Let me know when you are settled. I have some boxes in my garage I need to store somewhere. Maybe you have space." I did not reply. I drove the truck to Harborline Lofts alone. The apartment was small, but it was mine. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the industrial district. It was clean. It was quiet. For the first time in years, I could sit on a couch and not worry about someone needing a glass of water, a loan, or an emotional crutch. I began to practice what I called the new discipline. It was a survival strategy. When a text message came in from the family group chat, I forced myself to wait. Ding. "Mom." "Avery, are you free? Mason needs a ride to the mechanic." I would stare at the screen. My thumb would twitch, conditioned by decades of immediate obedience. But I would set a timer on the microwave. 1 hour. I would not reply for 1 hour. During that hour, the panic would rise in my chest. I would imagine them angry. I would imagine them disappointed. I would imagine Mason standing on a curb in the rain, abandoned. But then the hour would pass. And when I finally texted back, "Sorry, working, can't," the world did not end. Usually, they had already found another solution, or more often, Mason had just taken an Uber and charged it to my dad's credit card. Diane, sensing the change in the ecosystem, shifted her tactics. The demands became wrapped in layers of aggressive sweetness. "Just thinking of you." My brilliant scientist, a text would read, accompanied by 3 bouquet emojis. "Hope the new apartment is cozy." By the way, just a tiny note, Mason's tuition payment for little Leo is due, and the bar had a slow month. We are all chipping in just a little. I knew you would want to be part of the village. She stopped asking. She started assuming. She framed every request as an opportunity for me to prove I still loved them despite moving 40 minutes away. It was during this time that the envelopes reappeared, or rather, the ghosts of them. I had given my parents a spare key to my apartment for emergencies. It was a non-negotiable condition of my mother's acceptance of my move. "What if you slip in the shower?" she had wailed. "What if there is a fire?" So, I gave them a key. I would come home from my shift at Harvest Way Market and find the apartment subtly changed. A throw pillow moved. A window opened. My mother would leave notes. "Watered your plants." They looked thirsty. But sometimes, in the recycling bin in the mailroom downstairs, or even buried at the bottom of my own kitchen trash can under a pile of paper towels, I would see flashes of cream-colored paper. Once, I pulled a piece out. It was thick, torn in half. I could see part of my name, very Rui, and the bottom half of that black embossed logo, Gacy Trust. I stood in my kitchen, holding the torn scrap. A chill went down my spine. Had this come here to my new address? And had my mother, during one of her plant-watering visits, intercepted it and thrown it away? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she had brought over some of my old junk mail from the house to throw out. Maybe she was just cleaning up clutter she found on my counter. I did not want to believe that she was actively censoring my life. I did not want to believe that she was coming into my home, not to water plants, but to police my connection to the outside world. So, I put the scrap back in the trash. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself it was just spam, like she said. But the doubt grew. It was a slow, creeping rot in the foundation of my new life. To pay for the apartment, which was more expensive than I could really afford without my biotech salary, I had taken the jobs that required zero brain power. I worked the register at Harvest Way Market during the day, and 3 nights a week. I worked the graveyard shift at Fuel and Fresh. There was something soothing about the work. Beep, scan the item. Beep, bag the item. Paper or plastic. Have a nice day. It was a binary world. The transaction was simple. The customer gave me money. I gave them goods. There was no emotional blackmail. No one asked me to pay for their milk because they were my brother and they had a vision. If they did not have money, they put the milk back. It was honest, but the math of my life was becoming dishonest. I was making $15 an hour at the market and $12 an hour at the gas station. My rent at Harborline Lofts was $2,000 a month. My student loans were $600. My car insurance and the portion of my parents' insurance I was still guilted into paying was another $300. And then there was the Mason tax. Even with my new discipline, I was bleeding money. $100 here for a medical emergency that turned out to be a cosmetic dental cleaning for my nephew. $200 there for a bulk order of hops that Mason promised would turn a profit next week. My savings from Aurelia Biotech were gone, drained, vaporized in the furnace of the Ruiz family crises. That night at the gas station, before the old man walked in, I had hit the wall. I stood there in the cold, the smell of gasoline fumes mixing with the artificial scent of pine cleaner from the mop bucket. I looked at my banking app. $42.18. I thought about the 6 figures I used to make. I thought about the 16-hour days in the lab. I thought about the weekends spent scrubbing Mason's floors. I had given them my time. I had given them my career. I had given them my savings. I had given them my privacy. I had even given them the keys to my sanctuary. And what did I have to show for it? I had an empty tank of gas. I had an empty refrigerator. I had a family that only texted me when they needed an invoice paid. a terrifying question began to form in my mind, sharp and clear as a diamond. If I am not their wallet, and if I am not their servant, do they even know who I am? If I stop giving, will they stop loving, and the darker but colder truth underneath it? Is it love if you have to pay a subscription fee to keep it? I felt a physical pain in my chest, a tightness that had nothing to do with the freezing wind. I realized that I had been buying my family's affection for a decade. I was not a beloved daughter. I was a customer, and the prices kept going up. I looked at the pump. I looked at the flickering sign of the convenience store. I was trapped. I was 30 years old, brilliant, capable, and I was about to eat instant noodles for dinner because my brother needed a new sound system for a bar that nobody visited. That was the moment the door opened. That was the moment the wind blew in. And that was the moment Victor Hale stepped out of the shadows and into the neon light, carrying a basket of rice and a truth I was finally ready to hear. He did not just hand me a receipt. He handed me the answer to the question I had been too afraid to ask. He handed me the proof that someone, somewhere, had been keeping a different kind of score. And unlike my family, he was not looking to take. He was looking to balance the books. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, the engine idling rough against the cold, and stared at the piece of paper in my hands. The interior light of the sedan was dim and yellow, casting long shadows over the dashboard, but it was bright enough to read the text that was about to dismantle my entire understanding of reality. The document it felt wrong to call it a receipt was heavy. It was made of a thick, cream-colored cardstock that had a texture like linen. It did not smell like thermal paper or cheap ink. It smelled of archival storage and authority. At the top, where a store logo should have been, there was an embossed seal raised against the surface of the paper. It was an old-fashioned scale, balanced perfectly, surrounded by the words, Hale Legacy Trust. Below that, printed in a sharp, serif font that looked like it had been typed on a typewriter worth more than my life, was a name, Victor A. Hale, Chairman. I ran my thumb over the raised letters. The name sent a jolt of recognition through me that made my stomach drop. I had grown up in Westbridge. I had walked past the Hale Library at the university 1,000 times. I had driven past the Hale wing of the General Hospital. I had seen that name chiseled into granite and cast in bronze all over the city. My mother had always referred to my father's family as the Hales with a sneer, painting them as a distant, shadowy cabal of miserly villains. She had made them sound like petty tyrants who hoarded gold in a dark room. She had never mentioned that the Hales were those Hales, the people who practically built the city. The old man in the black and white photo she mocked was not just a grandfather I had never met. He was a titan of industry, and he had just bought $3,000 worth of rice from me at a gas station. I opened the folded cardstock. Inside, there was no list of groceries. There were no prices for beans or tuna. Instead, there was a block of text formatted like a legal addendum, justified perfectly to the center of the page. It read, Receipt Clause, Holiday Service Activation. I squinted, reading the fine print that followed. It was written in legalese, but the kind of legalese that was designed to be understood, not to confuse. Pursuant to Article 4 of the Hale Legacy Trust, discretionary signing authority may be temporarily transferred to a third-generation direct descendant under the following specific conditions. The descendant must be verified as performing service labor on a federally recognized holiday or significant cultural eve. The descendant must be verified as having 0 prior withdrawals or requests for aid from the trust. And the descendant must demonstrate an act of self-deprivation for the benefit of a stranger during said service. I read it again, and then a third time. Third-generation direct descendant. That was me. Performing service labor on a holiday. I was working the night shift at a gas station during the holiday rush. 0 prior withdrawals. I had never asked for a penny. My mother had made sure of that, telling me their money was dirty, while she presumably tried and failed to get it herself. Act of self-deprivation for a stranger. My hand flew to my mouth. The milk, the woman with the baby, the $42 I had sacrificed, leaving myself with nothing. He had seen it. He had been watching. This was not a chance encounter. This was a test, a calibration. Below the typed text, there was a handwritten note in blue ink. The handwriting was jagged but strong, the letters digging deep into the paper. This is the first receipt certifying you spent your resources on the only person who never used you yourself. If you are tired of being the fuel for someone else's fire, call the number below. At the bottom was a phone number, no area code, just a direct line, and a name: Serena Vaughn, Fiduciary Counsel. I leaned back against the headrest, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My breath fogged up the windshield. This had to be a trick. That was my first instinct, the instinct Diane Ruiz had bred into me. Rich people play games. They dangle carrots to humiliate you. My mother's voice was screaming in my head. They just want to divide us. Avery, they want to turn you against your family. They are cruel. But then I thought about the text messages on my phone. I thought about Mason's crisis with the beer supplier. I thought about the 60 hours I worked a week just to stay poor. I thought about the birthday cake they ate without me. Was that not cruel? Was it not cruel to make your daughter believe she was loved only when she was useful? I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was 2:45 in the morning. The world was asleep. My family was asleep, dreaming of ways to spend money they did not have. I picked up my phone. My fingers felt numb, disconnected from my brain. I dialed the number on the card. I expected a voicemail. I expected a robotic menu telling me office hours were 9 to 5. The line rang once. Hail Legacy Trust. I knew you would call. The voice on the other end was a woman's. It was crisp, cool, and terrifyingly alert. There was no sleep in her voice, no hesitation. It sounded like she had been staring at a screen waiting for a red light to turn green. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried to summon the professional tone I used to use in the lab. This is Avery. Avery Ruiz. I know who you are, Ms. Ruiz, the woman said. I am Serena Vaughn. I am the legal counsel for your grandfather, and for the trust that currently pays for your brother's leased Audi and your mother's escalating collection of designer handbags. The bluntness of it took the air out of my lungs. Excuse me, I managed to say. We do not have a lot of time, Avery, Serena said. The activation clause you are holding expires at midnight tonight. That gives you roughly 21 hours. But I imagine you will not need that long once you understand the scope of the situation. I do not understand the situation, I said, gripping the steering wheel. I just met a man who bought $3,000 of rice. He gave me this paper. He knew my name. He knows a lot more than your name, Serena replied. We know that you applied for a personal loan 3 weeks ago to cover a debt that is legally in Mason's name but attached to your credit score. We know you were denied because your debt-to-income ratio is underwater. We know you are currently working 2 jobs to pay rent at Harborline Lofts because you are too proud to move back home, which is commendable. By the way, I felt a wave of nausea. You have been spying on me. We have been auditing you, she corrected. There is a difference. The trust has a fiduciary duty to monitor where its potential liabilities lie. For 30 years, the Ruiz branch of the family, specifically your father, and by extension your mother and brother, has been a black hole of capital. We assumed you were part of the grift. We assumed the scientist daughter narrative was just a cover for money laundering or another scheme to extract funds. I have never taken money from you, I snapped, defensive anger flaring up. We know, Serena said, her voice softening just a fraction, though it remained sharp as a scalpel. We know because we have the letters. What letters? The correspondence sent to you by the trust upon your 18th, 21st, and 25th birthdays, she said. And the quarterly statements sent to your previous address. We tracked them. They were delivered. They were intercepted. They were destroyed. We have the affidavit from the postal carrier who confirmed your mother met him at the curb for years. My mind flashed back to the torn cream-colored paper in the trash can. Spam, she had called it, legal junk. She stole my mail, I whispered. She stole your agency, Serena said. She kept you in the dark, so you would stay in the fold. If you knew you had independent access to resources, you might not have been so willing to be their servant. Silence stretched over the line. The heater in my car whirred, sounding like a dying animal. "Why tonight?" I asked. "Why the gas station?" "We needed verification," Serena said. "Paper trails are one thing, character is another. Victor wanted to see it with his own eyes. He wanted to see if you would break. He wanted to see if, when pushed to the absolute limit of financial exhaustion, you would still act with integrity. You paid for that woman's milk. Avery, you had $42, and you gave away 8. That is not logic. That is pathology. Or it is heroism. Victor thinks it is the latter. I think it is a habit we need to break. You checked my bank account. We have a copy of your pay stubs from Harvest Way and Fuel and Fresh right here," Serena said, the sound of shuffling papers coming through the phone. "We verified your shift logs. We knew you were working the holiday. The clause was written for you. Avery, it is a legal keyhole, and you are the only one who fits the shape of the lock." "So what happens now?" I asked. "What is the choice he talked about?" "The receipt clause gives you temporary executive power over the Ruiz allocation," Serena explained. Her tone shifted, becoming deadly serious. "Currently, the trust disperses a monthly stipend to your father, which your mother controls. There are also several emergency credit lines open for business development, which Mason drains as fast as we replenish them. If you agree, before the deadline, we can reclassify the beneficiary status." "Reclassify. We can freeze it," she said. "All of it. The stipend, the credit lines, the bailouts. We can lock every single account associated with Robert, Diane, and Mason Ruiz effective immediately. We can redirect those funds into a protected trust that can only be accessed for specific, verified purposes like direct payments to educational institutions for your niece and nephew, bypassing your brother entirely." I stared out the windshield at the empty parking lot. "You want me to cut them off," I said. "I want you to stop the bleeding," Serena corrected. "They are hemorrhaging money, Avery, and they are using your blood to refill the tank. If you say yes, the money stops flowing to them. It stops enabling the bar, the bad investments, the guilt trips. It stays in the trust, or it goes to the children's future. But they, your parents and your brother, get nothing, not a cent, not until they prove they can function like adults." "They will hate me," I said. The words came out as a whimper. "They will say I am trying to destroy the family." "They are already destroying you," Serena said. "The question is not whether the family survives. The question is whether you do." I could not breathe. The power she was describing was too big. It was a nuclear button. I was just a cashier. I was just a failed scientist. I was the girl who bought groceries on Saturdays. I could not be the executioner. "You do not have to decide this second," Serena said. "But you do need to decide. We are ready to execute the order. All we need is your voice. Think about the receipt. Avery, think about the milk. Think about the last 10 years of your life. Do you want the next 10 to look the same?" "I have to go," I said. Panic was rising in my throat like bile. "I cannot. I have to go." "We will be here," Serena said. "Use the hotline. Midnight. Avery." I tapped the red button on my phone screen and threw it onto the passenger seat as if it were burning hot. I sat there in the silence, shaking. Freeze the accounts. Cut them off. It sounded like violence. It sounded like betrayal. It was exactly what my mother had always warned me about the cold cruelty of the Hales. But then I looked down at the cream-colored paper still resting on my lap. I looked at the handwritten note from the old man who had looked me in the eye and seen something worth saving. "This is the first receipt certifying you spent your resources on the only person who never used you yourself." I closed my eyes. I could feel the map of my life shifting. The ground under my feet was not solid anymore. I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and for the first time, I realized that the people holding the rope were the ones trying to pull me down. I put the car in gear. I needed to go home. I needed to be in my safe, quiet apartment. But as I pulled out of the gas station, Leaving the neon lights behind, I knew that safe and quiet were no longer options. War had been declared, and I was the one holding the ammunition. I unlocked the door to my apartment at Harborline Lofts and stepped inside, the silence of the room wrapping around me like a bandage. I did not take off my coat. I walked straight to the kitchen island, the one made of the gray quartz that I had been so proud of when I signed the lease, and placed the cream-colored receipt in the center of it. Under the pendant lights, the paper looked radioactive. It sat there, heavy and folded, pulsing with the potential to destroy my family. I looked at the digital clock on the microwave. It was 10 o'clock at night. I had 2 hours. The receipt clause expired at midnight. 2 hours to decide if I was going to be the dutiful daughter who kept the peace, or the third-generation descendant who burned the bridge to save herself from drowning. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A frantic, uneven rhythm. I needed a distraction. I needed to stop thinking about Serena Vaughan's icy voice and Victor Hale's steel blue eyes. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, intending to doom scroll through Instagram for 5 minutes to numb my brain. That was a mistake. The first thing that popped up on my feed was a notification. Lydia Hart mentioned you in a post. Lydia was my father's sister. Aunt Lydia. She was kind, chaotic, and completely lacking in social media etiquette. She had visited me a week ago, bringing a housewarming gift of towels and a potted succulent. I clicked the notification. It was a photo of my kitchen. Specifically, a photo of me standing in my kitchen, smiling, holding a glass of water. The background showed the stainless steel appliances, the high ceilings, and the view of the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The caption read, "So proud of my niece Avery. She is working so hard and living such a beautiful, organized life in the big city. Look at this place. She deserves all the good things." Family pride. Harborline. Lofts success. I felt the blood drain from my face. Lydia meant well. She truly did. But she had just posted a billboard advertising my perceived wealth to the entire extended family. She had tagged the location, Harborline Lofts. Everyone in Westbridge knew that Harborline was expensive. It was the kind of place where young professionals with 6-figure salaries lived. I scrolled down to the comments. Cousin Brenda, wow. That looks pricey. I guess the science game pays better than we thought. Uncle Mark must be nice. Some of us are just trying to keep the lights on this winter. Second cousin Tina. Is that a Sub-Zero fridge? Avery is bawling out. They were not congratulating me. They were auditing me. They were looking at the photo and calculating how much money I must be hiding from them. And then, the direct message came through. It was from Mason. He had sent me a screenshot of Lydia's post. Underneath it, he wrote a single line of text. Place looks expensive. I bet you have enough stored away to help your big brother through this winter. Right? There was no congratulations. There was no, I am happy for you. It was just an immediate assessment of my utility. To Mason, my clean kitchen was not a home. It was a liquid asset that he had not yet tapped. I was staring at the screen, my thumb hovering, wondering how to deflect him, when the next blow landed. My mother, Diane, sent a message to the main family group chat. It was a wall of text, punctuated by heart emojis and airplane icons. Good news. Everyone, Dad and I have made a decision. We cannot let the family be stressed and separated during this crisis. We bought tickets. We are flying in tomorrow morning. Mason and Kelsey are driving the minivan down with the kids. We are going to crash at Avery's place. It is plenty big enough for all of us. I saw the pictures Lydia posted. We can make it a slumber party. Prepare the sofa. Daughter. We are going to face this financial mess together, as a family. Love you. I dropped the phone on the counter. It made a loud clatter that echoed in the empty room. They were coming. Tomorrow. It was not a request. It was a notification of invasion. They were going to fill my quiet, safe sanctuary with their chaos. Mason would be pacing the floor, complaining about his suppliers. My mother would be reorganizing my cupboards and finding my hidden bank statements. My father would sit in the corner, turning up the volume on the TV to drown out the arguments. They were going to turn my apartment into their war room. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Diane. This one sent just to me privately. Avery, honey, I was thinking on the flight booking site. Since you are in such a good spot and we are so proud, maybe there is a simple solution to Mason's little legal issue. If you sold your car, you live in the city. You can take the bus, right? And maybe looked at breaking your lease to move back home with us for a year. The penalty fees would be small compared to the cash out. You could clear Mason's $60,000 fine instantly. Then we would all be under one roof again. It would be just like old times. Think about it. We can discuss it when we get there. I gagged. I physically gagged. The simple solution was for me to sell my car, lose my home, and move back into my childhood bedroom so I could pay a $60,000 fine for a bar that had never made a profit. She was suggesting I dismantle my entire existence to patch a hole in Mason's sinking ship. I walked over to the sink and splashed cold water on my face. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely cup the water. Just like old times, that was the threat. They wanted to drag me back to the time when I had no boundaries, no money, and no voice. I heard a ping from my laptop, which was sitting open on the coffee table. It was a specific chime, the notification sound for my secure email. I walked over and sat down on the edge of the sofa. The email was from an address I did not recognize, S. Vaughn, Hale Legacy, com. The subject line was encrypted. I opened it. Ms. Ruiz, per our conversation, my team has completed a forensic audit of the lease agreement for Mason's Yard and the associated cross-referenced bank transfers. You need to see this before you make your decision at midnight. Attached was a PDF. I clicked it open. It was a summary of Mason's spending for the last 6 months, alongside a copy of his commercial lease agreement. The spending log was a horror show. The business grants the Hale Trust had sent money meant for kitchen equipment and payroll had been siphoned off. August 14th. $3,000. Resort stay. Cabo San Lucas. September 02. $1,200. Consulting fee. Cash withdrawal at casino. October 10th. $5,000. Audio equipment, upgrade installed in personal vehicle. He was not failing because the market was tough. He was failing because he was stealing from himself. He was using the business account as a personal piggy bank, relying on the family to bail him out when the rent check bounced. But the second page was worse. It was a highlighted section of his commercial lease for the bar space. Serena had circled a clause titled Subsection 4C, Early Termination and Guarantor Liability. The legal language was dense, but Serena had translated it in the margins. The family bailout bonus. The note read, the landlord for Mason's Yard is a holding company known for predatory leases. The contract states that if the tenant defaults and faces eviction, a $60,000 penalty is triggered. However, if a third-party non-owner relative pays the full penalty to void the eviction, the tenant Mason receives a re-signing bonus or consultant fee of $15,000 from the landlord as an incentive to keep the tenant on the hook for another year. I read it 3 times. If I paid the $60,000 fine if I sold my car and my apartment to save him, Mason would not just be saved. He would get a check for $15,000. He would profit from my sacrifice. He knew. He had to know. That was why he was pushing so hard for me to pay it. That was why he sent the text about the expensive kitchen. He was not looking for a lifeline. He was looking for a payout. He was willing to let me burn my life to the ground so he could pocket $15,000 and pretend he was a successful businessman for another 3 months. I felt a cold, hard rage settle in my stomach. It replaced the panic. It replaced the guilt. This was not a family. This was a parasitic organism, and I was the host. My phone buzzed one more time. I flinched, expecting another demand from Diane or a guilt trip from Mason. But it was a text from Aunt Lydia. I saw the comments on my post. I am so sorry. Avery, I did not think they would react like that. I just wanted to show off how great you are doing. Listen to me. The kids, Mason's kids, are sleeping at my house tonight. I told Mason I would keep them for the weekend so they do not have to be in the car for that drive. They are safe here. They are eating popcorn and watching cartoons. Do not let them use the little ones as a weapon against you. And do not let them bully you, whatever you decide to do. Do not set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. You have done enough. I stared at the text. Lydia had the kids. They were safe. They were not in the minivan. They were not part of the invasion force. Mason was coming alone with Kelsey and my parents. They were coming for my money. I looked at the clock, 10:45. I looked at the cream-colored receipt on the court's counter. For years, I had told myself that I was helping. I told myself that giving them money was an act of love. I told myself that if I just gave a little more, they would finally be okay. But looking at that lease clause, I realized the truth. I was not helping them. I was enabling them. I was financing their delusion. As long as I was there to catch them, they would keep jumping off cliffs. And now, they were trying to push me off the cliff first so they could land on my body. Freezing the accounts was not revenge. It was not cruelty. It was a quarantine. I picked up the receipt. The paper felt warm in my hand now. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city of Westbridge. Somewhere out there, in a glass tower. Serena Vaughn was waiting for a phone call. I thought about my mother's text. Prepare the sofa. No, I said aloud to the empty room. My voice was steady. I will not prepare the sofa. I walked back to the table, picked up my phone, and dialed the number for the Hale Legacy Trust hotline. This time, my hand did not shake. This time, I was not asking for permission. I was placing an order. I woke up at 5 in the morning, long before the winter sun had touched the skyline of Westbridge. My stomach was a knot of cold anxiety, the kind that usually precedes a thesis defense or a root canal. I walked into the living room of my apartment, the space that I had fought so hard to pay for. And I did something pathetic. I taped a piece of poster board to the inside of my front door. I had spent the last hour writing on it with a thick black marker. I called it the guest rules. Rule number 1. All visits must be approved 48 hours in advance. Rule number 2. No opening the refrigerator or pantry without asking. Rule number 3. No live streaming, filming, or taking photos of the interior. Rule number 4. Children must be supervised at all times. If something breaks, it must be paid for. I stood back and looked at the sign. The marker strokes were angry and jagged. I had written it as a shield, a way to establish boundaries before the invasion began. But as I stared at it, I felt a wave of nausea. This was not a boundary. This was a surrender. By posting these rules, I was admitting that I was going to let them in. I was accepting the premise that they had a right to cross my threshold, and that the best I could hope for was to manage their destruction. I was still playing defense. I was still assuming that my role was to be the gatekeeper of a fortress that they were inevitably going to sack. I ripped the poster board off the door. The sound of the tape tearing was loud in the quiet hallway. I crumpled the paper into a ball and shoved it into the recycling bin. No, I whispered to the empty room. I am not negotiating the terms of my own occupation. I showered and dressed in the clothes I used to wear to the lab at Aurelia Biotech, a crisp white button-down shirt, tailored black trousers, and sensible boots. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe bun. I needed to look like a scientist. I needed to look like someone who dealt in cold, hard facts, not a daughter who could be bullied into submission with a guilt trip. I spent the morning pacing. I drank 3 cups of black coffee. I checked my phone every 5 minutes, watching the time tick closer to noon. At 11:55 in the morning, the intercom buzzed. It was a harsh, jarring sound that made me jump. I walked to the wall panel and pressed the button. The small screen flickered to life, showing a distorted fisheye view of the lobby entrance. There they were. My mother, Diane, was pressed close to the camera, her face filling the frame. Behind her, I could see the top of my father's bald spot and the shoulder of Mason's leather jacket. Avery, love. Diane's voice crackled through the speaker, bright and chirpy, as if she were just dropping by to borrow a cup of sugar and not to dismantle my financial future. "We are here. Buzz us up. Sweetie, it is absolutely freezing out here, and the wind is whipping around this corner." My finger hovered over the unlock button. It would be so easy. Just one press. Let them in. Make them coffee. Listen to the pitch. Write the check. Buy the piece. I moved my finger to the talk button instead. "I am coming down," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat and metallic. "What?" Diane asked, her smile faltering on the grainy screen. "Just buzz us in. Avery, we have bags. Your father's back is hurting." "I said I'm coming down," I repeated. "Wait in the lobby. Do not try to come up. I have instructed the concierge not to allow anyone without a key fob into the elevator." I released the button before she could argue. I grabbed my coat and the small stack of business cards I had printed the night before on cardstock paper. I took a deep breath, held it for 4 seconds, and let it out for 4. Then I walked out of my apartment, locking the deadbolt behind me with a loud, definitive click. When the elevator doors slid open in the lobby, the tableau that greeted me was almost comical in its predictability. My father, Rob, was standing near the fountain, looking miserable. He was clutching the handle of a massive, hard-shell suitcase, the big one they used for 2-week vacations. He was not here for a chat. He was here to move in. Diane was standing next to him, holding a white bakery box tied with a red string. She was wearing her nice coat, the one with the faux fur collar she saved for church and bank loan meetings. Mason and his wife, Kelsey, were wandering around the lobby perimeter, touching things. Mason was running his hand along the marble wall, nodding approvingly. Kelsey was inspecting a large potted fiddle-leaf fig tree, looking at the planter as if calculating its retail value. And despite Aunt Lydia's offer to keep them, the kids were there. Mason had brought them. Of course he had. Leo and Sophie were chasing each other around the concierge desk, screeching at a volume that made the security guard look ready to quit. They were the ultimate weapon who could say no to a grandmother wanting to see her grandbabies, who could discuss money when there were innocent children in the room. I walked across the polished floor, my boots clicking rhythmically on the stone. "Avery," Diane cried out, rushing forward with the bakery box. "Oh, look at you. You look so thin. Are you eating? We brought you a cake. It is German chocolate, your absolute favorite." I stopped just out of hugging range. "German chocolate is Dad's favorite. Mom, I am allergic to coconut, remember?" Diane blinked, her smile not wavering for a microsecond. "Oh, stop it. You are not allergic. You just do not like the texture. Anyway, it is a celebration. Look at this place." She gestured grandly to the high ceilings of the lobby. "It is like a hotel. Mason, is it not like a hotel?" Mason sauntered over, looking me up and down. He smirked. "It is nice, little sterile for my taste, but I can see why it costs a fortune. Security is tight." "Huh. Guy at the desk acted like we were terrorists." "He is doing his job," I said. Before they could launch into the next phase of the pleasantries, I walked over to where Leo and Sophie were trying to climb the fountain. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out 2 items I had bought at the bodega on the corner early that morning, 2 thick superhero comic books and a pack of washable markers. "Hey guys," I said, crouching down. The kids stopped running. "Auntie Avery." "Listen to me," I said, handing them the books. "I need you to do a secret mission. Take these over to those 2 chairs in the corner by the window. You have to read the whole story and color in the bad guys. If you stay in the chairs and are super quiet until the grown-ups are done talking, I will buy you the biggest slushie they sell at the gas station. Deal." "Deal," Leo screamed, grabbing the book. They scrambled over to the corner, sat down, and immediately opened the pages. Silence descended on the group. I stood up and turned back to my family. I had just disarmed the child shield. Now there was nothing between me and them. "Why are you here?" I asked. I did not say hello. I did not ask, "How was the flight?" I stripped away the social lubrication that we usually use to slide past the truth. Diane's face fell into a practiced expression of maternal concern. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Avery, do not be like that. We are family. We are here to support each other. Mason. Well, Mason has hit a little bump in the road. A bump, I repeated. It is a misunderstanding, really, Mason interjected. Stepping forward, he put his hands in his pockets, trying to look casual, but I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. The landlord for the bar is a shark. He found some loophole in the lease about noise violations and unapproved renovations. He is trying to hit me with a penalty. It is ridiculous. How much is the penalty? I asked. I knew the answer. I had the PDF from Serena Vaughn memorized. Mason shrugged. $60,000, give or take. $60,000, I said slowly. That is not a bump. Mason, that is a crater. It is just temporary, Diane insisted. Putting a hand on my arm, I flinched, but I did not pull away. Once he clears this up, the bar is going to take off. He has a new marketing plan, but right now, if he does not pay it, they will evict him, and if he loses the bar... She let the sentence hang there, heavy with the threat of Mason's emotional collapse. So here's the plan, Mason said, his voice gaining confidence. He gestured around the lobby. We talked about it on the drive down. You are paying a fortune for this place, right? And you are single. You do not need a doorman and a gym. You are barely here. He took a breath, preparing to deliver the solution that would save us all. If you sell your car, you can take the subway, right? And break the lease on this place. You could move back home with mom and dad, just for a year or two. You save on rent. We use the equity to kill this $60,000 fine. And boom, problem solved. We are all together. I keep the bar. You get to save money living at home. It is the logical move. It is efficient. I looked at him. I looked at his handsome, weak face. He truly believed this. He believed that my independence was a resource he was entitled to liquidate. He was suggesting I dismantle my entire life, my home, my transportation, my peace so he could pay a fine. And he was not even mentioning the $15,000 consultant fee he would get from the landlord for finding a third-party payer. He was going to profit from my destruction. I looked at Diane. She was nodding encouragingly, her eyes wide and hopeful. It would be so nice to have you home. Avery, your room is exactly how you left it. Well, mostly. We stored some of Mason's inventory in there, but we can move it. No, I said. The word hung in the air, sharp and final. Diane blinked. What? No, I said again. I am not selling my car. I am not breaking my lease. And I am certainly not moving back into a bedroom filled with unsold beer kegs to pay a $60,000 fine for a business that has been failing for 3 years. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. The security guard behind the desk stopped typing and looked up. Mason's face turned a blotchy red. Are you serious? You are going to let them evict me? You are going to let your niece and nephew starve because you want to live in a fancy apartment you do not even deserve? I earned this apartment, I said, my voice rising just slightly. I worked 80-hour weeks for 5 years to earn it, and Leo and Sophie are not going to starve. You are... Avery, Diane gasped, clutching her pearls, literal pearls that I had bought her for Christmas 3 years ago. That is a horrible thing to say. We are family. We share. That is what we do. No, I said. That is what I do. You take... I give. That has been the arrangement for a decade, and today, the arrangement is over. My father, who had been studying the pattern of the floor tiles, finally looked up. He looked tired. He looked old. He stepped between me and Mason, holding up his hands in a gesture of surrender. Now, Rob said softly. Let us not say things we cannot take back. Avery, honey, listen. Money is just paper. It comes and goes. I know it seems like a lot right now, but family is forever. Your brother is in trouble. When you were little, he always looked out for you. Remember when he beat up that kid who pushed you on the playground? He was 12, Dad, I said. He is 33 now, and he is not protecting me. He is trying to rob me. Rob you? Mason scoffed. I am offering you a chance to help the family legacy. But you are too selfish to see it. You have always been selfish, sitting in your lab, thinking you are better than us. I felt a cold calm wash over me. It was the same feeling I used to get in the lab when I looked through a microscope and saw the exact moment a cell structure began to fail. I saw them clearly now. I saw the manipulation, the entitlement, the absolute lack of love. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the stack of cards I had printed. I took one and held it out to my father. I am done discussing this, I said. Rob looked at the card. It was plain white cardstock. On it, I had printed an address and a time. Hale Foundation Center, 18th floor, conference room B, 3:00 p.m. What is this? Rob asked, squinting at the text. If you want to talk about money, I said, addressing the group. We are going to do it professionally. I have set up a meeting with the people who actually control the family finances. The Hales, Diane hissed, the name sounding like a curse word. You talk to them, Avery. Are you insane? They will eat you alive. They will laugh at us. They are expecting you at 3 o'clock, I said. If you want a solution to Mason's debt, that is where you will find it. But do not come up to my apartment, do not wait in this lobby, and do not ask me for a single dollar. I turned to look at the kids in the corner. They were engrossed in the comics. I will see you at 3, I said. You cannot just walk away, Mason shouted. We drove 6 hours. We have nowhere to stay. There is a Motel 6 on the highway, I said over my shoulder. It is very affordable. I hear they leave the light on for you. I walked back to the elevators. I pressed the button. The doors slid open immediately, as if the building itself was trying to protect me. I stepped inside and turned around. The last thing I saw before the silver doors slid shut was my family standing in the center of the lobby, my father holding a suitcase he would not be unpacking, my mother holding a cake I would not be eating, and my brother realizing, for the first time in his life, that the bank of Avery Ruiz was permanently closed. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since I was 12 years old. The elevator began to rise, carrying me up, away from them, toward the 18th floor and the end of the world as we knew it. At 2:45 in the afternoon, I stood in front of the Hale Foundation Center. It was a monolith of black glass and brushed steel that seemed to suck the light out of the winter afternoon. It did not look like a charity. It looked like a fortress designed to withstand a nuclear blast or a hostile takeover. I walked through the revolving doors and was immediately intercepted by a man who looked less like a receptionist and more like a private military contractor. He was built like a vending machine, wearing a suit that struggled to contain his shoulders. He did not ask for my ID. He simply nodded at me. Ms. Ruiz, he said. His voice was a low rumble. The 18th floor is cleared for you. As he pressed the elevator button, I noticed the watch on his wrist. It was heavy, silver, and engraved on the face were 2 small initials, VH. Victor Hale marked his territory. And for the first time in my life, I was walking into that territory not as a trespasser, but as an invitee. The elevator ride was silent and swift. When the doors opened, I stepped into a conference room that spanned the entire width of the building. One wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of Westbridge, the city my family lived in, the city I had struggled in, looking small and gray from this height. At the head of a long obsidian table stood Serena Vaughn. She looked even sharper in person than she had sounded on the phone. She wore a white suit that looked like it could cut skin. At the far end of the table, sitting in a high-backed leather chair, was Victor Hale. It was the first time I had seen my grandfather in the flesh. He did not look like the monsters in my mother's stories. He looked like a scientist examining a petri dish. He was dressed in a 3-piece charcoal suit, his silver hair combed back with severe precision. He did not stand up. He did not smile. He did not offer a warm, grandfatherly embrace. He just watched me walk to the chair opposite Serena. his steel blue eyes tracking my movement with zero emotion. "Sit," Serena said. I sat. 3 minutes later, the elevator dinged again. The Ruiz family spilled into the room like a chaotic oil slick. Diane was leading the charge, her heels clicking loudly on the polished concrete floor. Rob was trailing behind her, looking pale and sweaty, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. Mason walked in last, wearing sunglasses indoors, looking annoyed that he had been summoned to a meeting that interfered with his business schedule. "This is ridiculous," Diane announced, throwing her purse onto the table. "We drove all the way here because Avery is having a tantrum. Who are you people?" Then she saw Victor. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. She grabbed Rob's arm, her fingernails digging into his coat. "Hello, Robert," Victor said. His voice was not loud, but it killed every other sound in the room. "Dad," Rob whispered. He sounded like he was 5 years old. I did not know you were involved." "I am always involved when my capital is being hemorrhaged," Victor replied. Mason took off his sunglasses. He looked from Victor to Serena to me. "Okay, look, I do not know what Avery told you, but this is a family matter. We do not need outside consultants." "Sit down," Serena commanded. She did not raise her voice, but the authority in it was absolute. They sat. They huddled together on one side of the table, leaving me alone on the other. The division was physical and stark. "This is an official meeting of the Hale Legacy Trust," Serena began, tapping a tablet in front of her. "I am Serena Vaughn, fiduciary counsel. As of midnight last night, the receipt clause was activated." She gestured to me. "Ms. Avery Ruiz is currently operating as the temporary signatory for the Ruiz family allocation," Serena stated. Diane let out a screech of laughter. "Avery. She is a cashier. She cannot sign for anything. We are her parents. We are the family. This is not fair." "Fairness is a concept for playgrounds, Mrs. Ruiz," Serena said, her voice icy. "This trust does not reward the loudest person in the room. It rewards the most disciplined." Serena picked up a document from the table, the original cream-colored receipt I had received. She placed it in the center of the table. "This clause was written by Victor Hale 30 years ago," Serena explained. "It was created shortly after Robert here dropped out of business school to find himself in Europe on the family dime. Victor anticipated that the lack of financial discipline might be genetic, so he created a failsafe." She pressed a button, and a screen descended from the ceiling. "The condition for a third-generation descendant to take control is simple," Serena said. "They must never have asked for money, and they must be found performing service labor on a federal holiday while the rest of the family is at leisure." On the screen, images began to cycle. First, a copy of my shift logs from Harvest Way Market, Thanksgiving Day. 8 hours, Christmas Eve. 10 hours. Next, a copy of the security footage from Fuel and Fresh. It showed me wiping the counter at 2 a.m. Finally, a digital copy of the receipt from last night. The $42 I had planned to spend on myself, the $8 I spent on the woman with the baby. "Avery Ruiz qualified," Serena said. "She was working to survive while the rest of you were spending to impress." She clicked a remote. The screen changed. It showed a montage of the Ruiz family's labor. Mason's Instagram posts from Vegas. Diane's credit card receipts for consulting lunches that were clearly spa days. Rob's subscription to a premium golf channel he never watched. "We are the real family," Diane shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "We love each other. You are just trying to divide us with your cold money." "Let us talk about love," Serena said. "And let us talk about the $60,000 fine that brought you here." She clicked the remote again. A document appeared on the screen. It was the commercial lease for Mason's yard. It was zoomed in on a paragraph highlighted in yellow. Subsection 4C, the family bailout bonus. "This is the contract Mason signed," Serena said. "It is a predatory lease, common in high-risk commercial zones. It states that if the tenant faces eviction due to non-payment of fines, and those fines are paid in full by a non-owner relative, the landlord will issue a $15,000 rebate to the tenant as a consulting fee for securing the funds. The room went dead silent. I stared at the screen. The numbers were right there. $15,000. If I had sold my car and emptied my savings to pay the $60,000, Mason would have received a check for $15,000. Mason, Diane whispered. Her voice trembled. Mason, did you know about this? Mason shifted in his chair. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at his shoes. He did not look at me. It is standard business, Mom, Mason muttered. It is called financial leverage. The landlord wants his money. If I get someone to pay it, he gives me a kickback. It is how the world works. I was going to use that $15,000 to fix the bar's signage. It was for the business. You were going to sell your sister's car, I said, my voice shaking with rage. You were going to make me homeless, and you were going to make $15,000 off of it. You would have been living at home, Mason shot back. You would have been fine. You are so dramatic. Someone had to pay the fine. Avery, why should the landlord keep all the money? I was just being smart. I looked at my father. Rob was staring at his son as if he were seeing a stranger, but he said nothing. He just slumped further into his chair. It gets worse, Serena said. She clicked the remote again. This time, it was a series of text messages projected on the 10-foot screen. They were messages between Diane and Mason. Dated from yesterday. Right after Aunt Lydia posted the photo of my kitchen. Diane, did you see the fridge? That is a Sub-Zero. Those cost $10,000. She is holding out on us. Mason, I know. She acts like she is broke, but she is sitting on a gold mine. We need to go down there. If we corner her in person, she will cave. She always caves. Diane, bring the kids. She cannot say no to Leo. We will tell her it is for their school tuition. Once she transfers the cash, you can pay the fine and keep the bonus. We will split it. I need new tires for the SUV. Mason done. Just make sure she does not ask to see the actual eviction notice. I photoshopped the date to make it look more urgent. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My mother, my own mother. She was not just enabling him, she was conspiring with him. She knew about the bonus. She knew about the lie. We will split it. I looked at Diane. She was staring at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. That is out of context, she stammered. We were just joking. We were stressed. You planned it, I said. You planned to bring the kids to my apartment to guilt-trip me into giving you money so you could split a $15,000 kickback. You turned my life into a heist movie. We did it for the family, Diane screamed, tears finally streaming down her face. We need the money. Avery, your father's pension is gone. Mason is drowning. We did what we had to do to survive. You did what you had to do to exploit the only person who was actually working, Serena corrected, for the first time. Victor Hale leaned forward. The leather of his chair creaked, a sound that was louder than Diane's sobbing. He looked past me. He looked past Mason. He looked straight at his son. Rob. Robert, Victor said. Rob flinched. Yes, Dad. You sat there, Victor said. His voice was devoid of anger, which made it terrifying. It was the voice of a man stating a fact, like water is wet or fire burns. You sat there for 30 years and watched your wife and son turn your daughter into a battery. You watched them drain her energy, her money, and her spirit, and you did nothing. I wanted to keep the peace, Rob stammered. Peace, Victor asked. That was not peace. That was a massacre in slow motion. You let them treat her like livestock. You bred her for slaughter every time you needed a check. Victor stood up. He was tall, imposing, a tower of charcoal wool and judgment. I told you once that family is an experiment, Victor said. You put people together and see what they create. I look at this table, Robert, and I see a failed experiment. You call this a family. I call it a parasite attached to a host. He turned his steel blue eyes to me. "Avery," Victor said, "you have seen the evidence. You have seen the lease. You have seen the texts. The truth is on the screen. Now, the question is simple." He gestured to the empty space on the table in front of me, where Serena placed a heavy fountain pen. "Do you want to be the host?" Victor asked. "Or do you want to be the cure?" I looked at the pen. I looked at the screen where my mother joked about splitting the money from my destruction. I looked at Mason, who was glaring at me with pure hatred because his scheme had been exposed. I realized then that the coldness of this room, the glass, the steel, the silence was not cruelty. It was clarity. For the first time in my life, the fog of family obligation had lifted. I could see the sharp edges of reality. I reached out and picked up the pen. It was heavy. It felt like a weapon. "I am ready," I said. Serena Vaughn did not shout. She did not slam her hand on the table. She simply reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a navy blue folder. She opened it with a precise, practiced movement and placed 2 documents in front of me. They were short, brutally short. "Order number 1, Serena said, her voice cutting through the lingering echoes of my family's shouting match. "This is a complete and indefinite suspension of the Ruiz Family Discretionary Fund. It terminates the monthly stipend paid to Robert and Diane Ruiz. It revokes all authorized user privileges on the Hale corporate credit cards. It closes the emergency credit line currently being used to service the debt of Mason's yard. Effectively, it turns off the tap." She pointed to the second document. "Order number 2, she continued. "This establishes the Ruiz Children Education and Wellness Trust. It allocates a protected sum for Leo and Sophie. This money covers tuition, medical expenses, clothing, and extracurricular activities. However, the funds are vendor direct. That means the trust pays the school, the trust pays the doctor. No cash ever touches the hands of the parents. It is a closed loop." She reached into her pocket and produced a pen. It was heavy, made of black lacquer and silver. She placed it perfectly parallel between the 2 documents. "The choice is yours, Avery," she said. "You can leave things as they are and let them consume you until there is nothing left, or you can sign." The pen sat there on the dark wood of the table. It looked less like a writing instrument and more like a detonator. For a second, the room was silent, and then the explosion happened. "No!" Diane screamed. It was a primal, terrified sound. She lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the table. "You cannot do this, Robert. Do something. She is going to bankrupt us. She is going to kill us." "I will kill you," Mason snarled, his face twisting into something ugly and unrecognizable. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "If you sign that paper, Avery, I swear to God, you are dead to me. You are killing my business. You are taking food out of my kids' mouths." "The food is right there in order number 2, Serena interjected calmly. "She is actually guaranteeing they eat. She is just ensuring you do not eat their portion." "Shut up," Mason yelled at her, then turned back to me. "Do not look at her. Look at me. I am your brother. You owe me. You owe me for all the times I looked out for you. You cannot cut me off. I will lose the bar. I will lose the house. Kelsey will leave me." My father, Rob, did not yell. He simply folded in on himself. He put his head in his hands and began to weep. It was a quiet, broken sobbing that was harder to hear than Mason's threats. It was the sound of a man realizing that the comfortable fog he had lived in for 30 years was blowing away, leaving him naked in the cold. "Please," Diane begged, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "Avery, baby, please, just a little longer, just until spring. We will fix it, I promise. Do not do this to your father. He is old. He cannot handle the stress." The noise was physical. It battered against me, the threats, the begging, the guilt. It was a cacophony of emotional violence that I had been listening to my entire life. "Give us more. Save us. Fix us. It is your fault." I felt like I couldn't breathe. The air in the room was too hot, too thick with their desperation. I stood up. Where are you going? Mason shouted. Sit down. We are not done. I did not look at him. I walked past Serena, past Victor, toward the far wall of the conference room. There was a heavy glass door there that led to a small, decorative balcony overlooking the city. I pushed the door open. The wind hit me instantly, biting. Winter wind that smelled of exhaust and snow. I stepped out and pulled the heavy glass door shut behind me. The silence was instantaneous. The glass was soundproof. Inside the room, I could see their mouths moving. I could see Mason waving his arms. I could see Diane clutching Rob's shoulder. I could see the red flush on their faces. But I could not hear them. They looked like actors in a silent film, flailing and screaming into a void. I walked to the railing and pressed my forehead against the cold glass. Below me, the city of Westbridge sprawled out in a grid of gray and white. I could see the highway. I could see the distant flicker of the fuel and fresh sign where I had stood 24 hours ago. I closed my eyes and thought about the lab. I thought about the clean, sterile world of Aurelia Biotech. I thought about the protocols we used when a culture was compromised, when a sample was infected with the aggressive bacteria. You did not try to reason with the bacteria. You did not ask the bacteria to please only eat a little bit of the healthy tissue. You did not give the bacteria a second chance because it was family. You froze it. You lowered the temperature until all biological activity stopped. You put the sample into stasis. It was not an act of murder. It was an act of preservation. You froze the rot to save the organism. Freezing my family's accounts was not punishment. It was cryogenics. If I gave them the money, if I paid the fine, if I let Mason get his kickback, I was feeding the infection. I was giving the bacteria exactly what it needed to grow until it consumed the host. And I was the host. If I signed those papers, I was lowering the temperature. I was stopping the movement. I was forcing the system to pause. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. My hand was shaking from the cold. The name on the screen made my breath catch. Jordan Reyes. Jordan was the one part of my life I had kept hermetically sealed away from the Ruiz family. He was a structural engineer I had met 2 years ago. He was kind, steady, and blissfully unaware of the depths of my family's dysfunction, because I never let them meet him. I was terrified that if they met him, they would find a way to use him, or break him, or make me feel guilty for having him. I answered the phone. "Hey," I whispered. The wind whipped my hair across my face. "I am here," Jordan said. His voice was deep and warm, a stark contrast to the steel and glass around me. "I know you are at the meeting. I just wanted to tell you something." "They are screaming," I said, looking through the glass at the silent pantomime of my family's rage. "They look like they want to tear me apart." "Let them scream," Jordan said. "They are screaming because the ATM is growing legs and walking away. Avery, listen to me. Whatever you choose to do in that room, make sure you are choosing it for Avery. Not for Mason, not for your mom, not even for the little girl inside you who wants them to be proud. Choose for the woman standing on the balcony." "It feels cruel," I admitted. "My dad is crying." "Surgery always looks like violence to people who do not understand medicine," Jordan said. "You are cutting out a tumor. It is going to bleed, but it is the only way the patient survives. And you are the patient, Ave. You are the one who matters." He paused. "I am right down the street," he added. "I am sitting in the coffee shop on the corner. I am not going anywhere. Win or lose, you walk out of that building, and I am right here." "Thank you," I said. My throat felt tight. "I love you. I love you too. Go finish it." I hung up. The warmth of his voice lingered for a second before the cold wind stripped it away. My phone buzzed again. A text message. It was from Aunt Lydia. "The kids are asking about you. Sophie drew this while we were watching movies. She says it is for Auntie Avery." Attached was a photo of a drawing done in crayon on a piece of construction paper. It was crude, the way children's drawings are. It showed a stick figure with long brown hair me. I was standing next to a red box that looked like a gas pump. In one hand, I held a bag labeled food. In the other, I held a giant yellow circle that was probably a coin, But the most important part was the smiles. The stick figure was smiling, and next to it were two smaller stick figures, Leo and Sophie, holding hands with me. Underneath, in wobbly kindergarten letters, it read, "For Avery." I stared at the drawing. Sophie did not draw a bar. She did not draw a big house. She did not draw a stack of money. She drew me with food and gas. Even a 5-year-old understood the basics of survival better than my brother did. They did not need Mason's yard to be successful. They did not need a visionary father who gambled their tuition money on consulting fees. They needed school. They needed doctors. They needed a world where their grandmother didn't use them as pawns to extort money from their aunt. If I signed order number 2, their future was secure. The money would go straight to the school. Mason couldn't touch it. Diane couldn't touch it. I looked back through the glass. Mason was red-faced, shouting at Serena now. Diane was clinging to Rob. They looked desperate, but for the first time, I didn't see them as victims. I saw them as addicts. They were addicted to the ease of my money. They were addicted to the lack of consequences, and I had been their dealer. Every time I paid a bill, every time I smoothed over a crisis, every time I let them invade my space, I was giving them another fix. I was keeping them sick. Freezing is an intervention, I said aloud to the wind. I took a deep breath. The cold air filled my lungs, sharp and clarifying. I looked down at my hands. They were strong hands. They were the hands of a scientist who had led a team of 12 people. They were the hands of a woman who worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over her head. They were hands that could hold a pen. I realized, with a sudden, jarring clarity, that no one had ever asked me what I wanted. Not once in 30 years had anyone asked Avery, "What do you want to do with your money, Avery? How do you want to spend your Sunday, Avery? Do you want to pay for this?" It was always Avery. "We need Avery. You must, Avery. You can." But today, Victor Hale had put a pen on the table and asked me to choose. I looked at the reflection of my face in the glass door. I looked tired. I looked pale. But my eyes were steady. "I want to be free," I whispered. I did not want them to die. I did not want them to suffer. But I wanted to be free of the weight of their choices. I wanted to buy groceries without calculating if my brother could afford his beer shipment. I wanted to answer my phone without a spike of adrenaline. I wanted to be a person, not a resource. I turned away from the railing. I reached for the handle of the glass door. The handle was cold, but as I gripped it, I felt a strange warmth spreading through my chest. It was the warmth of agency. It was the heat of a decision finally made. I pushed the door open. The sound of the room rushed back in the shouting, the crying, the chaotic noise of the Ruiz family. But it sounded different now. It didn't sound like a command. It sounded like background noise. It sounded like a storm that was raging outside the house, while I was finally, safely, on the inside. I stepped back into the room. I let the heavy glass door click shut, sealing the cold outside. I walked past Mason, who stopped yelling mid-sentence when he saw my face. I walked past Diane, whose sobbing faltered. I walked straight to the table, pulled out the heavy chair, and sat down. I picked up the black and silver pen. It was cold against my skin, but my grip was steady. I looked at Victor. He nodded, a microscopic movement of his chin. I looked at the paper. I was not destroying the family. I was saving the only parts of it that still had a chance to grow. I uncapped the pen. I walked back to the heavy obsidian table and sat down in the chair at the head of the room. It was a seat of power, positioned directly between Serena Vaughn and Victor Hale, facing the chaotic tribunal of my family. The room was so quiet that I could hear the hum of the air conditioning system 50 floors above the street. My family was holding its breath. I could see it in their eyes. They were watching me with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. They were waiting for the Avery they knew to return. They were waiting for the dutiful daughter, the sister who always fixed things, the woman who had spent a decade lighting herself on fire to keep them warm. They expected me to pick up the pen and apologize. They expected me to say I could not do it. They expected me to ask Serena for a compromise, something that would let Mason keep his bar and let Diane keep her illusions. I looked at the leather folder in front of me. Then, I reached into the pocket of my blazer. I pulled out the crumpled ball of paper I had retrieved from my recycling bin earlier that morning. It was the guest rules I had written in a panic at 5 in the morning. I smoothed the wrinkled paper out on the sleek black table. The jagged marker strokes stared back at me. Rule number 1. Call ahead. Rule number 2. Do not eat my food. I looked at the list. It was pathetic. It was a list of pleas from a victim who was trying to negotiate the terms of her own abuse. Do you know what this is? I asked. My voice was not loud, but it carried to the corners of the room. Diane craned her neck. Is that a list of conditions? Because we can follow rules. Avery, we can be good guests. We promise to call first next time. No, I said. I picked up the paper with both hands. I ripped it down the middle. The sound of tearing paper was sharp, like a gunshot in a canyon. I put the halves together and ripped them again, and again. I let the pieces flutter down onto the black table. They landed softly, a pile of white confetti that looked like dirty snow. All of those rules were defensive, I said, looking at the pile. They were based on the assumption that you still had a right to access me. They assumed that I had to build a wall because you were inevitably going to try to break in. I looked up. I met Mason's eyes behind his sunglasses. I met Diane's tear-streaked face. I met Rob's averted gaze. From this moment on, there is only one rule, I said. Respect. We respect you, Mason blurted out, leaning over the table. We respect you so much. Look, I drove all the way here. You drove here to ambush me. I cut him off. That is not respect. That is hunting. Respect means you honor my time. Respect means you honor my space. And most importantly, respect means you honor the word no. If I say no, and you try to argue, manipulate, or guilt me, you are gone. If you do not respect me, you do not get to be in my life, not as a brother, not as a mother, not as a guest. Okay, Diane said, nodding frantically. We get it. Boundaries. It is very modern. We can do boundaries. Now, about the signature. She gestured to the pen, her eyes hungry. I turned to the 2 documents Serena had laid out. Let us be clear about what I am signing, I said. I placed my hand on order number 2 first. This is the Ruiz Children Education and Wellness Trust, I said. This order takes a significant portion of the capital and locks it away for Leo and Sophie. It pays for their school. It pays for their doctors. It pays for their clothes and their summer camps. See, Diane said, turning to Rob. She is a good aunt. She is taking care of the babies. However, I continued, my voice hardening, this money is vendor direct. That means the check is cut to the school. The check is cut to the pediatrician. Not a single cent of this money will ever pass through your hands. Mason, or yours, Mom. The relief on Diane's face vanished, replaced by a look of horror. What? She gasped. But we are their parents. We need to manage the funds. How are we supposed to buy them things? You send the invoice to the trust, Serena interjected smoothly. We pay the store. You get the goods. You do not get the cash. You are stealing my grandchildren, Diane wailed. You are saying we are not fit to handle money for our own family. You are taking them out of our hands. No, Diane, Serena corrected her. This fund does not steal the children. It steals your excuse. You can no longer use those children as a reason to ask Avery for cash. Their needs are met. The shield is gone. I watched the realization hit Mason. I saw his eyes dart back and forth as he calculated. He had planned to use the kids' tuition as a cover for his next bailout. Now, that cover was blown. That is insulting, Mason hissed. You think I would steal from my own kids? I think you already have, I said. Every time you use their tuition money to buy a new sound system for a bar that has 0 customers, you stole from them. I am just making sure you cannot do it again. I moved my hand to the other document, order number 1. And this, I said, is the bitter pill. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "This order freezes the Ruiz Family Discretionary Fund," I stated. "It terminates the monthly allowance for Mom and Dad. It cancels the credit cards. It revokes the emergency line of credit for Mason's yard. It stops the flow of money completely." "You cannot do that," Mason said. His voice was low, shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You cannot just turn it off. We have bills. We have payments. The bar has a lease." "The bar has a $60,000 fine because you violated the lease," I said. "And you wanted me to sell my car to pay it. If you sign that—" Mason stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. "If you sign that, you are killing us. You are putting your own family on the street. You are an ungrateful, bald-hearted bitch." "Avery, after everything we did for you, after we let you be the golden child—" "Mason," Rob shouted, shocking everyone, but Mason ignored him. "She is cold," Mason yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Look at her. Sitting there with the rich people, judging us. You have ice in your veins." I looked at my brother. I remembered him teaching me how to ride a bike. I remembered him protecting me on the playground. And I remembered the text he sent yesterday joking about splitting the kickback from my destruction. "I am not cold," I said. My voice was steady, calm, and terrifyingly reasonable. "I am just done letting you burn me alive to keep yourselves warm." Mason opened his mouth to scream again, but the words seemed to die in his throat. He looked at the document, then at me, and he saw something he had never seen before. He saw a wall that he could not climb, dig under, or bully his way through. I turned my gaze to my father. Rob was sitting with his head bowed. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. "Dad," I said. He looked up. His eyes were red. "You knew," I said. "You knew about the letters. You knew Mom was throwing them away. You knew I had a trust fund that could have paid for my college, for my apartment, for everything, and you let me work double shifts while you watched baseball." Rob's voice cracked. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "It was just easier. Avery, your mother gets so upset, and Mason needs so much help. I just wanted peace. I thought if you did not know, you would stay close. I thought if you needed us, you would not leave. You did not want me to need you," I said. "You wanted to need me. You wanted a safety net." "I am sorry," he whispered. "It was easier to pretend I did not see it." "I know," I said. I did not feel anger toward him anymore. I just felt a profound, exhausting pity. But I am not going to live the easier life. Dad, I am not going to pretend anymore. I turned away from them. I turned to Serena Vaughn. "Execute order number 1, I said. "No," Diane screamed. She scrambled out of her chair. "Avery, no, do not—" "Execute it," I repeated. "Freeze all discretionary funds and credit lines associated with the Ruiz branch. Effective immediately. The freeze remains in place until a sustainable financial plan is submitted and approved by a third-party auditor. No more bailouts. No more transfers." Diane's scream turned into a sob. She collapsed back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. Mason slammed his fist onto the table. It sounded like a gunshot. Bam! The heavy table vibrated. The water in the glasses rippled. The large assistant by the door took one step forward. He did not run. He just moved, a massive wall of muscle shifting into an intercept course. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I watched Mason's fist hit the table, and I felt absolutely nothing. No fear, no guilt. Just the clinical observation of a tantrum that no longer worked. "Execute order number 2, I said, my voice cutting through the echo of the slam. "Establish the Ruiz Children Education and Wellness Trust. Fund it to the maximum allowable limit. Direct payments only. Secure their future." Mason stared at me. His chest was heaving. He looked at the pen in my hand, and then he looked at the 2 documents. He realized it then. The weapon he had kept in his back pocket for 10 years. The "Do It for the Kids" card had just been shredded. I had saved the kids, but I had left him to drown. I had surgically separated his hostages from his demands. He slumped back into his chair. The fight went out of him all at once, leaving him looking deflated and young and terrified. I looked at Victor Hale. My grandfather had not moved during the entire exchange. He sat at the end of the table, his hands folded in front of him. He looked from his son, weeping in his hands, to his grandson, defeated and sulking, to his daughter-in-law, hysterical. Then he looked at me. He nodded. It was a very small movement. It was not a nod of affection. It was the nod a professor gives a student who has finally solved a complex equation. It was an acknowledgement that the hypothesis had been proven. Discipline could defeat habit. The experiment was a success. I picked up the pen. It was heavy, balanced perfectly. The black lacquer was cool against my fingers. I moved the tip to the signature line of order number 1. The room was silent. Even Diane had stopped crying to watch. They were witnessing the death of their old way of life. I signed my name. Avery Ruiz. The scratch of the nib against the thick paper was loud. It was a sharp, definitive sound. I moved to order number 2. Avery Ruiz. I capped the pen. The click was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of a door locking. It was the sound of a bank vault closing. It was the sound of the word no, spoken in a language that the law, the bank, and the world had to respect. I placed the pen back on the table and pushed the folder toward Serena. "It is done," I said. Serena Vaughn closed the blue leather folder with a soft, decisive snap. She picked up the documents, tapped them against the table to align the edges, and handed them to the large assistant standing by the door. The movement was bureaucratic and mundane, but the impact was seismic. "The orders are processed," Serena announced, her voice devoid of any theatricality. "Effective 9 o'clock in the morning on Monday. Every credit card issued to the Ruiz family name under the discretionary fund will be declined. The auto-pay on the lease for Mason's Yard will be canceled. The monthly stipend transfer to the joint checking account of Robert and Diane Ruiz will cease." She paused, looking over her glasses at my family. "Simultaneously, the Ruiz Children Education and Wellness Trust is now active. Enrollment deposits for Leo and Sophie's schools have already been queued for payment. Their medical insurance premiums are paid in full for the next 12 months. The silence that followed was the silence of a machine shutting down. "You just killed my bar," Mason whispered. He was staring at the table, his hands trembling. "You actually did it. You killed it." "The bar has been dead for a long time, Mr. Ruiz," Serena replied, not unkindly. "We are just finally signing the death certificate. What your sister just saved was the financial future of your children. They will go to college. They will have braces. They will have winter coats. They just will not have a father who gambles their security on a business that loses money every single quarter." "But what about us?" Diane asked. Her voice was small, stripped of its usual manipulative power. She looked from Serena to me, her eyes wide with panic. "Avery, honey, listen, if I apologize, if I say I am sorry for the letters, can you open the tap just a little bit? Just a trickle. We have the heating bill. We have the car payments. Just enough to get us through the winter." I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had shredded my mail and intercepted my trust fund notifications for a decade. I looked at the woman who had tried to guilt me into selling my car to pay for a kickback scheme. She was bargaining. She was doing what she always did, assuming that if she pushed the right emotional button, the boundary would dissolve. I did not say a word. I sat there, my hands folded on the black table, and I let the silence stretch out between us. I let the silence do the heavy lifting. I let her hear the echo of her own desperation. I let her realize that the Bank of Avery was not just closed for the holiday. The building had been demolished. My silence was the answer. There was no ask and receive anymore. My father, Rob, cleared his throat. He looked terrified, like a man who had just woken up on a life raft in the middle of the ocean. Maybe we can start over," he stammered, looking at Victor. "Dad. Victor, we can fix this. You, me, the grandkids. We can be a family again. We can start fresh. Victor turned his head slowly to look at his son. His expression was not angry. It was not cruel. It was simply the look of a man who was done funding an illusion. "If you want to start over, Robert," Victor said, his voice gravelly and firm, "then go out and find a job. Do not look for a check. Look for work. That is how you start over." "A job?" Rob blinked. "But I am 60. "Then you have experience," Victor said. "Use it." I stood up. The movement drew everyone's eyes. "Here are the conditions," I said. My voice was clinical. I fell back into the rhythm I used in the lab when I was outlining a safety protocol. There will be no negotiation. There will be no emergency exceptions. I looked at Mason. "If you want the freeze lifted in the future years from now, you will need to provide 3 consecutive years of tax returns showing independent income from legitimate employment, not a business loan, not a grant, wages." I looked at Diane. "You will attend financial counseling with a fiduciary appointed by the trust. You will learn how to budget a pension. You will learn that money is finite." I looked at Rob. "And you will take responsibility for the debts you signed your name to. You will not pass them to your children." "You are treating us like criminals," Mason spat, though there was no heat behind it anymore. He just sounded tired. "I am treating you like adults," I corrected. "I am giving you the dignity of consequences." I nodded to the assistant. "Please escort them out." The large man stepped forward. "This way, folks." It was a slow, shuffling procession. Rob picked up his coat, looking dazed. Mason put his sunglasses back on, trying to hide his red eyes, trying to salvage some scrap of his cool business owner persona. Diane was the last to leave. She stopped at the door. She turned around and looked at me. Her face was a mask of tragedy, the perfect picture of the martyred mother. "You will regret this," she whispered, her voice trembling with venom. "You will sit in your fancy apartment, all alone, and you will regret being so cold to the people who raised you." I looked at her. I felt a pang of the old guilt, a sharp little hook in my heart. But then I remembered the cold wind at the gas station. I remembered the feeling of choosing between gas and groceries while she sat in a warm house I helped pay for. If I did not freeze the money, "Mom," I said, "you would have continued to burn my life to the ground just to keep yourselves warm for another month. I chose to keep myself warm for the first time in 30 years. She stared at me, shocked by the truth of it. Then, she turned and walked out. The heavy door clicked shut behind her. The room was suddenly very quiet. It was just me, Serena, Victor, and the expansive view of the city. Serena let out a breath she must have been holding. She walked over to the sidebar and poured a glass of water. She brought it to me. "Drink," she said. I took the glass. My hand was steady. I drank the water, feeling it cool the tightness in my throat. "You did well," Serena said. Her voice was dry, professional, but there was a distinct note of respect in it. "We have had that clause in the trust charter for 3 decades. I have seen 4 other descendants try to use similar provisions. They all folded. They all gave in at the last minute because they could not handle the guilt. You are one of the very few people who has ever used the receipt clause for the purpose it was actually created." "Which is," I asked, "to save the host from the parasite." Victor said. I turned to my grandfather. He was standing by the window, looking out at the gray sky. "You have a mind for systems, Avery," Victor said. "You saw the data. You analyzed the threat. You executed the solution. That is rare." He turned to face me. "The trust needs people who can make hard decisions," he said. "There is a position in the oversight division. You could work here. You would be good at it. The pay is significant." He paused, studying my face. "Or," he continued, "you can go back to what you actually love. We can arrange for an endowment, a research grant, something that lets you return to the lab without the pressure of 16-hour days and financial terror." I looked at the offer. It was a golden ticket, a job at the trust, or a fully funded return to science. I thought about the lab. I thought about the quiet hum of the equipment. I thought about the feeling of discovery. And then I thought about the burnout. I thought about the months of exhaustion. I do not know yet, I said honestly. I think I need a minute. Victor nodded. Take all the time you need. The offer stands. I want enough time to remember why I loved the lab in the first place, I said. I want to sleep for a week. I want to eat a meal that I did not buy at a gas station. And this time, when I go back to work, I am not going to let anyone spend my energy until I am empty. I am going to keep some for myself. A wise protocol, Victor said. He extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was dry and firm. It felt like a contract. I walked out of the Hale Foundation Center 10 minutes later. The winter afternoon had turned into a twilight gray. The wind was still blowing, biting and sharp. But as I stepped onto the sidewalk, I realized something strange. I was not cold. I buttoned my coat, the cheap fleece one I had been wearing for 3 years, and took a deep breath. The air smelled of snow and exhaust, but it also smelled of freedom. I pulled out my phone. There was a text from Jordan. I am at the cafe on the corner. I ordered you a hot chocolate, the big one, and another text from Aunt Lydia. It was a photo of Leo and Sophie. They were asleep on her couch, tangled together under a blanket. The drawing of Auntie Avery taped to the wall above their heads. They are safe. The text read, You did good. Kid. I started walking toward the corner. My boots crunched on the salt-scattered pavement. Halfway down the block, I passed a gas station. It wasn't the Fuel and Fresh where I worked. It was a different one, brightly lit, with digital pumps glowing in the dusk. I stopped. I looked at the price board. Regular unleaded was expensive. A gallon of milk was expensive. I reached into my pocket and touched the debit card that was linked to my own bank account. The account that was no longer being drained by Mason's emergencies. The account that would not be hit with a massive withdrawal on Monday morning. I walked into the station. I went to the cooler and took out a bottle of water, a sandwich that actually looked fresh, and a bag of the expensive kettle chips I liked. I walked to the counter. Pump 4, please, I told the clerk. Fill it up. Fill it up, the clerk asked, looking at my beat-up car through the window. All the way to the top, I said. I paid for the gas. I paid for the food. I walked back out to my car and stood there while the pump chugged. I watched the numbers climb. $10, $20, $30. For the first time in my life, I was not doing mental math. I was not calculating if I would have enough left over for rent. I was not choosing between mobility and hunger. I had gas. I had groceries. And I had myself. The nozzle clicked off. The tank was full. I got into the driver's seat, unwrapped the sandwich, and took a bite. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. I looked at the passenger seat. The cream-colored receipt from Victor was gone, filed away in Serena's office, but I did not need the paper anymore. I knew the lesson by heart. I started the engine. The heater kicked on, blowing warm air over my frozen hands. For the first time in my life, I did not have to choose between gas or groceries. I chose me. And that receipt my grandfather slid across the counter. That was the last bill my family would ever send to my name. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have ever felt like the walking wallet for your family, or if you have had to make a choice between keeping the peace and saving yourself, I want to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. And tell me about the last time you were brave enough to say no. Do not forget to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories for more tales of justice. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get heard by everyone who needs the courage to freeze their own toxic accounts.